Consolidated Planning Board to order, and we'll begin with the roll call.
Michael Houlihan.
Here.
Michael Houlihan is present. Dudley Imprada.
Here.
Dudley Imprada is present. Jason Rice.
Here.
Jason Rice is present. Jamie Hoffman.
Here.
Jamie Hoffman's present. Stephanie Potts. Stephanie Potts is absent. Vince Caristo. Vince Caristo is absent. Peter Benson.
Here.
Peter Benson is present. Andy Mefford. Andy Mefford is absent. Neva Hassan. Neva Hassan's absent. Helen Jenkins. Helen Jenkins is absent. John Newman. John Newman is present.
Okay, move on to approval of the minutes. Doesn't have the date of the meeting. I'm trying to remember what the date of the last meeting was. Gosh.
30th.
The 30th? Do I have an outdated one?
Is that right?
October 30th?
October 30th.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so we'll move for, anybody have any changes to the minutes? Anybody notice anything?
I'll make a motion to approve them.
Okay, motion from Dudley. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Peter. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, seeing none, the minutes from the October 30th, 2018 meeting are approved. Move on to item 4, which is public comment on items not on tonight's agenda. So if there's anyone behind the illustrative, demonstrative exhibits here that has any comment on items not on the agenda, feel free to come forward. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to staff comments. Any particular staff comments? Okay, we have no public hearings tonight, so we'll move on to item 7, communications and special presentations. And tonight we have Missoula Area Land Use Mapping Project update from Mr. Andrew Hagemeyer and Ms. Christine DeCenzo. Take it away, folks.
I'm going to get up, present from up here, like with you guys. Up there, you're looking at tiny little screen. I would just suggest if the public wants to see what's going on, there's not many people.
We could move to these chairs.
Yeah, that's super. And we're going to have the same stuff on the screen. Yeah, come on up. I think that's great. I'd rather talk at everybody than.
Honorary board members tonight. It's a new program we have.
I move that Gary and Judy are added to the planning board.
Worried they're going to be making faces at me. We've heard this before, so they're going to know when I'm screwing up.
Well, and now at least the faces are to your face instead of to your back.
All right, so yeah, we're here to update you on the land use map that we've been working on for over a year and a half now. We've been updating you consistently through the process. However, this is the first time that we've really got the full picture for you. We've created this draft. We went through about a month and a half of public outreach on the draft. We collected comments, and we're in the process of making revisions. So we have a few objectives and goals. If you want to move forward there, Christine. Tonight's objectives, update you on the current status of the land use map. We want to go through the land use map and the themes that are within it that are going to be part of the package that we submit to the board for the public hearing. We want to, in that same light, we want to prepare you and have you guys have an understanding of what is in the package and why for the public hearing that's coming up, tentatively scheduled for January 15th. And then we want to answer your questions if you have any questions on where we're at. So here's the game plan. We're going to talk about what we heard throughout the public outreach process from the beginning to today. We're going to talk about the land use designations. Christine will cover those. We'll walk you through the land use map and then talk about the implementation strategy and then end the presentation with questions. Right, next slide. All right, so station one. These are posters that we used in the open houses during this last round of public outreach. So you're seeing a lot of what the public interacted with, and it forms the foundation of the land use element. So the land use, we've got the land use map, and you guys all know about the land use map. It has land use designations, and it kind of guides growth. But the land use designations, the land use map has a section that is text, that is the land use designations themselves, a description of what commercial means, what residential means. It's an important piece of this project because that's really the policy foundation for our zoning regulations, which we are going to be working on updating here, starting this process to update the zoning regulations. It's going to start in the new year. And then in addition to the land use designations, we also have implementation strategies. What we heard throughout this process is we don't want shelf art. We don't want a land use map that sits and isn't actually implemented. We want you guys to put this together and then execute it. So we have implementation strategies. So what you're going to be adopting is essentially these boards, but in a much more detailed format. A description of what we heard throughout the process. What we heard forms the foundation for the land use map. And then the land use designations themselves, the land use map, and those implementation strategies. We haven't figured out the exact terminology of how we're going to ask you to, you adopt a resolution, a recommendation to the county commissioners. We haven't figured out if it's a growth policy amendment, if it's an element of the growth policy. We'll dial that in, but when we submit that to you, you'll be dialed in on what exactly you guys are specifically going to motion. Okay. So first of all, the station one, there are some certain things about the Missoula area that we need to recognize that are just realities that we have to consider when we're developing a land use map. First of all, our population growth. Missoula County as a whole, which includes the city, is growing somewhere between 1,000 to 2,000 people per year. You've heard me say that before. When you start to refine it into geographic areas, it gets a little bit trickier, but we're projecting that the planning area that we're considering, which is this green blob, minus the city limits, is going to probably grow by around 14,000 people in the next 20 years. So a lot of that growth will probably end up, happening in areas right on the edge of the city and probably annex into the city, but it's growth that right now is in the county and we need to plan for. So we're calling these realities, these things that we just have to deal with in the land use map. That's the first one. The second one is geography. We are in a tight valley. Everyone knows that we're surrounded by mountains, we're surrounded by rivers. It's what makes Missoula a great place to live. It also really dictates where growth can and can't go. Just naturally, because of our geographic constraints, growth is sort of pushed to the northwest of town. And the next reality that we're addressing, that we're facing, is the infrastructure and services. Local government can only provide such a level of infrastructure and services. There are only so many places on that map right now where we have sewer and water that we really can accommodate higher levels of growth. And that's sort of a reality that we have to deal with, where the infrastructure is today. And then finally, we think this is a hot topic and we really want to recognize it in the land use map, is the housing prices. Land use planning can itself become a constraint that holds back housing and so that's something that we really want to recognize, is that housing prices in Missoula are on the rise. So those are sort of the realities that we're dealing with. We had multiple rounds of public outreach through this process, and the first round really focused on values and ideas. What the public want, what they valued in the community, and what their ideas were on growth. So these values and ideas kind of make up this square right here, but generally people in Missoula value housing, having an adequate housing supply. And you could call it affordable housing, but affordable for different income ranges, so not necessarily the HUD definition of affordable, but it's just that we have an affordable community. That people valued the idea that we try to focus our development towards our existing infrastructure that we have in place. People value agriculture. They value the fact that we can go to the farmer's market and buy locally produced products. People value open space. And what I mean by open space is a general term in this sense, not maybe the open space as in the bond type open space, but the fact that there is wildlife, there are views, there is agricultural land, there are timberlands, and there is actual open space that we maybe have secured. People value multimodal transportation. So we got a lot of comments about people wanting a walkable community, wanting bike paths, connectivity to ride their bike around town, from part of town to part of town. But also that people want to be able to have a decent commute. They don't want to be stuck in traffic, and they're concerned about specific traffic, locations of traffic. So instead of just saying we want walkability or bikeability, we think the value is that people want a multimodal community. Finally, people value water quality, which is pretty obvious. We don't need to explain that much. And then people value community identity. And they kind of value that in two ways. First is that they see Missoula has a unique identity. We don't want Missoula to look like everywhere else in the country, any town USA. That type of identity, that we have a distinct identity as a community. But also that these neighborhoods that make up the outer edges of Missoula that we're planning for, that they have a unique identity. That's also really important to this community identity. That in East Missoula, they don't see themselves as Missoula, they see themselves as East Missoula. Out in Bonner and West Riverside, they see themselves as Bonner and West Riverside. Out in Target Range, they see themselves as Target Range. They want that distinct identity in their neighborhoods too. So based off of our realities, our values and our ideas for growth, which aren't on this board but will be on the document that you receive because they're kind of repetitive to the values, is we developed some imperatives. And what we're saying is, we want the foundation of the land use map to be what the community wants it to, what we want the community to look like and what the people want the community to look like in the future. So based off the reality of what we're facing and what people are valuing, there are certain strategies that we must employ when we're putting together the actual map. So these are the planning theory type strategies. So that's stuff like making sure that this list of values is represented in this map. So that people value agriculture, that you can see that agriculture is valued in the map. The second imperative is provide for a variety of housing types. That's to ensure that the market can respond to changes over time. If we just plan for one type of housing type, say right now, today, we need single-family homes under the price of $300,000. And we just created a land use map for single-family homes under $300,000, the market's going to change. In 5 years, it'll be different. We want the market to be able to evolve over time, so that what we want to see is that the land use map has different types of housing in respect to the units. So are there single-family, multifamily, duplex, triplex? Is that represented in the land use map? Also, throughout the price points. So we don't want to just not plan for $1 million homes. We need the entire price range represented, that's possible within that land use map. There's a little bit of mobility within that ladder of housing types. If you don't have the right pyramidal structure of your home prices, then certain price points can become pinch points and cause the price points below that to get more competitive. The next imperative is that we use the infrastructure that we have in place today. Like I mentioned, there's only so many areas on this land use map where we have sewer and we have water and we have roads. And that's mostly northwest of town. And that can accommodate quite a bit of our growth over the next 20 years. However, it can't accommodate all of our growth over the next 20 years. So we're going to need, and that's the next imperative, we're going to need to identify some locations on this map where growth is going to happen over the long term. We're going to need to find ways to extend infrastructure. We're not going to be able to just use the infrastructure we have in place today to make this work. And finally, we really want to make sure quality of life is reflected in this land use map. For example, East Missoula and Bonner have a lot of public land surrounding them. But and they have trails, they have some of that infrastructure in place that make them great places to live, but they're also kind of missing that last connection that, in West Riverside, they really lack a public connection to Forest Service lands to the north of them. In East Missoula, they actually lack a trail to get you on the top of Mount Jumbo. They have to go all the way around Mount Jumbo to the L to get to the top of Mount Jumbo. So we just need a little bit of work in those communities to really rise up, get the quality of life as high as it could be. But then also in these emerging neighborhoods, like what's going to be happening out in the Y over the course of the next 20 years, we don't have any menus at all right now out there. So as we are guiding growth out there that direction, we need to be thinking about getting a bike trail out there, getting some river access out there, getting some open space so people can have some trails or connectivity to the national forest. So we really want those things to be considered in the land use map as well. So what's really important, and Christine is going to get up and talk about this now, is that these imperatives and the values are represented in the land use designations in the land use map. And I'll talk a little bit more how they're represented in the land use map in a minute, but Christine's going to talk about the land use designations.
Yeah, and so, I'm Christine Spenza. And these two slides show the 15 land use designations that we've developed. On the slide behind you, you'll see that we went from 34 within the planning area, 64 total throughout the county. So we went from 64 down to 15, which we're proud about, and was a sort of initiative in that growth policy and direction from that. And if you want to go to the next slide, Andrew. Yeah, and so here's just that table of land use designations that we have in the current land use element. So this has that 15, and you can see it's broken down by goals, land uses, characteristics, intensity, mobility, and access. So each of these designations, which you can't see probably from there, but speaks to each of those elements specifically. And so we've got the goals, which are set the designation or its purpose, the land uses, so recommending what's what you'll see most prevalent there, and in some cases some secondary uses. We've got characteristics, so what the built environment would look like. Is it going to be single-family homes, duplexes, commercial, large commercial? How big would that commercial be? The intensity, and so that would be what touches on the density or the scale of development in each district. And then the mobility and access, like Andrew touched on, tying that land use to transportation services. So the general expectations about the types of transportation systems we'd see throughout the districts. And so we think these sort of menu of options is much clearer on sort of two levels. The menu is simplified from that first slide, so we went from 64 to 15. So there's less sort of overlapping in the districts where we used to have, maybe a range from 5 to 10. And then also a district that was 10 acres and a district that was 5 acres. We've definitely simplified those and condensed them. And then in another sense, it simplifies and it's clearer in their communication because it speaks to things that are on the ground a little clearer. So where there are regulations that limit development, we sort of identify those in a clearer way in this map, in this update. And then just some of the highlights from the districts. Sort of the backbone of the project is that development should occur where there's infrastructure, so sewer, water, roads are currently in place. That's where we're going to sort of drive development in that first push. In this update too, we have created a district for agriculture, which somehow in the 64 districts we had before, we didn't touch on agriculture. So we do that in this district, and in this update, and we heard from a lot of folks in the public that that was something that they wanted to see. And then we've also got a tool to incentivize clustering. So we've got a density bonus in 5 of the sort of lower density districts. So that density bonus, if folks preserve a public good like agricultural soils or wetlands, or provide a public good like trails or access, then we would incentivize that by allowing them to maybe build more units than would generally be allowed in that district. And so that would hopefully make it financially feasible. And then we've also got, we heard a lot of, I'm not a laser pointer person, we've got a lot of public support for development along I-90, where that road is sufficient and, that would hold a lot of that, those 14,000 people that we're expecting to see in the next 20 years. And then another new district that we have is the Live Make, and that's sort of an innovative district for the area. You'll see it in light purple in Bonner and East Missoula, and it's sort of a recognition of what's currently on the ground, so they've got sort of a unique character in those areas where it's residential, but a lot of people have a shop in the back. So some light manufacturing or some artist studios, it sort of allows for that to be acknowledged and, propel that a little bit forward too. And then we've got, throughout the districts, from the lower residential, sort of the rural ag, up into the higher residential and some of the commercial, we allow for that range of housing types. So you'll see districts that allow the full swath of residential types, single-family homes up to multifamily, and then some that sort of specify single-family homes are maybe more appropriate, or the denser development is more appropriate. And so we think we've touched on and sort of captured the realities on the ground and provided that room to grow into the next 20 years. And then we've also heard, as Andrew was saying too, the areas that are walkable are very appealing. So any district that's sort of a center, like neighborhood center or commercial center, sort of that walkability and ability to get around by different modes of transportation is emphasized and tied to that land use. So those lower density areas are going to be, more auto-centric travel. The more dense areas are going to be a little bit more walkable. So I think that's it for designations, and if you have questions, we can talk about those in a bit.
All right, so back to the land use map. Something that was really important in this process that came out was people really emphasized that there are 2 jurisdictions that are in charge of land use planning within this area. There's the city and the county. But most people, most community members, they don't care that there's 2 planning jurisdictions. They just see that we're one community, and they want their planning to be good. And so we've really taken to heart that one community approach in this process. We've always tried to keep that in our back of our mind. And so because of that, that feedback that we received, we really see it that we're in this together with the city in managing our community. And we feel that there are certain roles that the county must take in planning for this jurisdiction. And I'm going to kind of walk through those roles because it covers a lot of these topics and covers a lot of how the land use map was shaped. So the first role that we think is really important is that we coordinate and we work with the city of Missoula on those edge areas, and that we're on the same page with them on land uses. And so these are the areas that we expect as development to occurs. They're likely going to require water and sewer infrastructure, and so the outcome is probably going to be that development is, when it occurs, is annexed into the city. And so in these areas that we really think coordination is important is in the Miller Creek area. And we're basing this somewhat off what's occurred in the last 10 years or so, how development has played out. So in the Miller Creek area, the Orchard Homes area, Mullen Road, and then up, I don't know what you'd call that, Western Reserve, South I-90, in that area. But these are the areas where we have the sewer and water in place today in most cases, where the roads are in place today. And so the city isn't really doing contract sewer and water in these areas, they're annexing in these areas. So we worked with the city to try to identify the appropriate land uses within these areas. We use the city's growth policy as an important guide when designating these land use designations in these areas. And we try to use land use designations that are fairly similar to the city's, and at least in terms of use and intensity. Our land use designations are structured much different than the city's. So, with a couple of exceptions that we really see coordinating, I think the main one is this purple area right here, which is designated as community mixed use. The community mixed use so this is the area that's east of the airport, south of Broadway, and north of Mullen. It's largely undeveloped at this point in time, but it's surrounded by the infrastructure we need to develop. In fact, there's actually a sewer line running right down the middle of it right now. It's just a field, you would never know, sewer line. I bet you're aware of that, but sewer line running right down the middle. We really think that this is an opportunity to work with the city directly on master planning this area, master planning the infrastructure, and getting this area ready to develop. It was a subject of a build grant just recently that the city and the county worked on together to try to get transportation and infrastructure built in that area. We were not successful, we found out last week, but we still think that would be a great place to sit down with the city and do some master planning jointly and try to get that development ready as soon as possible. We'd also like to see that develop at a pretty high intensity. We're thinking an average of 15 dwelling units per acre. This can accommodate a lot of growth over the long term. We would like to see that area be mixed use. I like to try to explain it as the area around Orange Street Food Farm. That's kind of what we're envisioning. You've got single family homes, large and small. You've got apartment buildings, you've got stores, you've got restaurants all in that area. That's the way we used to do development, 67 years ago. It seemed to work out pretty well for us. We got away from doing it that way. We'd like to maybe get back to doing stuff that way back in this area out by the airport. So the second thing that we really think our role is in the land use map in planning for our community is that recognizing that not all of this planning area is going to be annexed into the city, and that some areas are going to grow, and these are our neighborhoods that we have. And so we really want to make sure that these neighborhoods keep their distinct identity. And right now we're kind of identifying the neighborhoods as East Missoula, the Bonner, Milltown, West Riverside area, and the merging area neighborhood isn't much of a neighborhood now, but I think it will be in the future of the Y. Somewhat, to a lesser extent, the lower end of Miller Creek, but I think mostly that will go into the city when it develops. So the third thing that we really want to have represented in our land use map is that not everyone wants to live on a small lot in the city. Some people want to have larger lots. They want to have a horse. They want to be out in the country. And so we tried to incorporate some of that land use within this land use map as well. You see that a lot of that up by the Y, in Butler Creek, Grant Creek, Rattlesnake, Target Range, Upper Miller Creek. These rural, Big Flat, these rural neighborhoods. Fourth thing that we really want to make sure is that we protect the public health and safety in this land use map. And so that really means steering growth away from the areas that we have some sort of mapped hazard. So that's our high fire hazard areas, these WUI zones, and then our flood plains that run along the rivers, the main stem rivers. We're not getting detailed on the side streams. Finally, there was one more. Oh, that we think it's our role in the county also to make sure that we have open lands, recreation areas, that we have ranches, that we have farms, those open spaces that we talked about, those rural lifestyles that we think are important in Montana. So generally, the strategy has been to guide growth to right along the city's edge and then along the corridor, the I-90 corridor to the northwest. We've kind of taken a two-step approach in the land use map. Because we have a certain amount of infrastructure in place today, and the way it works is right now the county's not in charge of the water and sewer. We're not the ones out there planning where the sewer lines and water lines are going to go. We kind of need to take a two-step approach to this. So we project that a lot of the growth that's going to happen in the near term is going to be right in this area, and the city's going to be an important player in this. But in the long term, we really believe that the county needs to become more proactive in planning for infrastructure, for developing the infrastructure, financing the infrastructure. And so you'll see these areas, these brown areas, especially along the I-90 corridor, they're called the planned neighborhood. We think those are places where we don't have the infrastructure today to adopt or to incorporate a bunch of growth there. But we think they're really important places that over the long term, we need to kind of hold on to. So when it is time to grow, when the infrastructure is in place, we can grow at higher densities. We can have a mix of uses. And so it's almost like these places are reserved for future growth once the infrastructure is in place. And I'll touch on this in the implementation strategies. We have some ideas how to get infrastructure out there. And then, of course, the agriculture is a big conversation point, and our strategy is to try to protect the large agricultural tracts out in the Clark Fork where, we have big tracts left, and then mitigate for agriculture, like in the target range area, through the clustering that Christine was talking about, and through incentives. So that's sort of how the land use map was put together. So the implementation strategy, as I mentioned, it was, people really wanted to see this thing implemented. They just want to see a land use map that sat on the shelf. And so we developed an implementation strategy that kind of has three key parts. And the first part is code updates. The land use map and the land use designations especially, these are really important and people overlook them, are the policy foundation for our zoning regulations. We haven't had a major overhaul of our zoning regulations in over 40 years, just like our land use map. They were developed around the same time. So we're not shying away from the fact that this is an overhaul. We're not doing a little tweak to our land use map and our land use designations. This is a big change, and both in the land use designations and in the land use map. And so, starting this year, we're going to be starting a process to update our zoning regulations based off of this land use map. That will be the policy foundation for that. It doesn't mean we're going to have 15 zoning designations, but the zoning designations will be based off of these 15 land use designations. That process is probably going to take about 18 months. It's not going to be a short one. It's going to be a big overhaul. Second code update is the mobility and access portion of our land use designations talks a little bit about the type of transportation infrastructure we would like to see in those designations. We have to acknowledge that our land use and our transportation systems are directly related. And how our transportation systems are built impact our land use decisions on the land use around them, and vice versa. How our land use looks impacts our transportation. And so that's why we included a section on mobility and access. We're trying to integrate that a little bit, transportation and land use. And so with these mobility and access considerations are very general. They don't get deep into the woods on transportation and how that looks, but it does talk about this area should be built to urban standards, or this area should have all pedestrian facilities for all roadways, and or this area should have a connected road grid. That's the kind of conversation that happens in this mobility access session. So our subdivision regulations have a little bit of a tiered system right now in our infrastructure standards. And what we would like to do is we would like to tie that infrastructure standard into our land use map. So if it says in our subdivision, if you have a subdivision and you're reviewing your, as you're going through the review process, and if you are in the rural residential land use designation, or the rural residential and small agricultural land use designation, in that chart, it would say, in the subdivision regulations, it would tie that land use to the infrastructure standard that you need. So it would say, in these rural residential areas, you would need the rural infrastructure standard. But in the residential land use designation, you would have to build your roads and your subdivision to the urban infrastructure standard. So right now, there's not the geographic area for that. It follows some other boundary. I'm not really sure off the top of my head, but we would like to tie it to our land use designations to get that stuff in there. Finally, we would like to update, after the zoning regulations are complete, the zoning map. So we feel that within this land use designation, this land use map, there are going to be areas where the land use map is calling for higher densities than what current zoning allows. And so we are encouraging that the county proactively rezone some of these areas. So instead of having the landowner come in and try to do it piece by piece, landowner by landowner by landowner, we would identify areas in a process, a public process, and say we're going to rezone all these areas. County will do it one swipe to get them up in line with the land use map. We don't think we can do that for the entire land use map, but we think there are probably going to be areas where we can. Also, not all of this is zoned. I would say 60% of it maybe is zoned. So we think there are unzoned areas within this land use map that probably should be zoned. That could be the entire area, it could be just portions of the area. We'll have to try to figure that out at some point. But yeah, we would like to update our zoning map to try to get it more in line with the land use map at some point in the future. Moving on to infrastructure. I think this is one of the more major changes that we're suggesting in this process from our current strategy. Right now, Missoula County kind of sporadically builds infrastructure like water and sewer or roads. It's usually responding to some sort of condition. Like in City Lake, it's responding to the fact that the EPA is getting really upset with Missoula County. We would like to be more proactive, to actually say, let's build some infrastructure because our planning says we expect this area to grow. And so we've identified some specific potential projects. And we're not saying all these projects need to occur or should occur, but we think it's really important to be honest about the level of commitment this is, adding these infrastructure projects over the future. And we actually think it will help potentially fund them if we identify them specifically in our growth policy. So the first, and this is in order, the first potential process is expand water service on a Mullen Road. So right now, specifically, there is a county-owned and operated water system in the Elmar Estates area. It is developed, the pipes in that system it was developed in the 60s. They're too small to expand capacity. So that it can't, they can't really serve any more people than we already got today. However, the water right that we have for the system is way underutilized. If you look on that, there's a fairly decent arterial road on Mullen Road, although you start to get some congestion issues when you get closer to town. And the sewer line runs out there. So we've got sewer service, we've got roads, we're just missing the water in that area to be able to develop to a residential density, which is 3 to 11 units per acre that we've identified. This clay bench that's out there is also a spot where there was a lot of agreement that, hey, that's just a place where we should grow in the future. So if we could expand that water system, upgrade those pipes to a bigger capacity, we have the potential to develop more of that area that's underdeveloped right now. Next potential project is expand or develop a water service out at the Y. There is a water system out at the Y. It's a privately owned system. It is public in the respect of how DEQ considers it. I mean, it has all these testing requirements that have to be met. That water system is sort of located in this area. This whole area right now is underserved, and it's also a place that we identified for future growth. So a water system out here wouldn't just benefit the adjacent properties in the near term. We would be able to maximize our industrial lands that are out there, which is it's long been identified as a problem in Missoula County. Is we've got a lot of industrial land, but we don't have the infrastructure to develop on it. So getting a water system out there would really increase the development potential of that industrial land, as well as open up some of the adjacent areas that we think the long-term growth will occur. So that could happen either by expanding that existing private system, working some sort of public-private partnership, or perhaps creating a water district, purchasing city water capacity to bring it out there, maybe even getting a hold of one of the wells out at Smurfit Stone and getting that water right and bringing it over. Lots of options on the table. We're not trying to narrow it down at this point. We just know we need to get water out to the Y. Next infrastructure project is complete the road grid east of the airport in this area. I've talked about that. We had the bill grant to try to do that. We didn't get it this time. Probably something we need to try again in the future. But that area, the big barrier to growth in that area is the cost of building the infrastructure, the roads. And that's why it's not developing. And I mean, it's experiencing development, but it's probably not up to the pace that the city and the county would like to see. The next is improve some of the existing road networks out at the Y, especially south of the Y in this area along the Dayshaw and roller coaster. The county has been making some improvements of it in the road network. There's more that need to be made. We'd like to see it get closer to an urban standard, including the local road network in this area. We really think that will facilitate more growth. Next is wastewater treatment in the Bonner area. We all know that there's a lot of septic systems out there that we need to address over time. It's also not having any sort of wastewater treatment is a constraint on development and the type of development the community really wants to see. So we need to identify a way to get some wastewater treatment out there. Also, we shouldn't forget that we need water out there too. Wastewater treatment is only going to get us, half a unit per acre. It's not going to get us into more residential type designations. And it might not support commercial development, the mixed use that they want to see out there. So there are some private systems out there that exist right now. It might be an opportunity to work public-private partnerships to extend some of those systems. Finally, two more. Infrastructure for the North Reserve Scott Street area. Sort of this part of town right here, there's a master plan the city has adopted to address the infrastructure constraints in that area. It wouldn't just benefit the city, it would also benefit the county to get that infrastructure online and start developing that area at more higher intensities, so we'd like to see that happen at some point. And finally, improve Highway 200 in East Missoula. Right now, there's no curb, gutter, sidewalks. It's really dangerous. People die on it. On Halloween, the fire department literally goes out and puts fire trucks onto the road, put the lights on to slow traffic so kids can cross the street. East Missoula really wants to see that happen, and the county does too. And so does the MPO. So those are the potential infrastructure projects we've identified. We've worked with Public Works to identify those projects. We're going to work with our city partners as well to further refine it. As for financing, there's a couple things. let's not shy away from the fact that these projects are probably, each one probably could run into the tens of millions of dollars. This is not cheap. Who knows if we can even really afford to do them all? We don't know. We don't probably need to do them. But we recognize that they're expensive, and we recognize that not only once we build them, we have to maintain them over the long term, so there's ongoing costs to these projects. So we talk a little bit about funding mechanisms in here too. These aren't the only funding mechanisms that are probably out there, but we identified the main ones. Grants, so the build grant, perfect example. That was through the Department of Transportation at the federal level. That was going to be for $23 million. It was going to build collector roads in that area east of the airport. That would have been a big deal. They can also be used, there's EPA grants for sewer systems, and it can be probably applied out in the Bonner area. We get something planned. Lots of grants, small grants too. There's little grants that help small systems, underserved communities. Capital improvements planning. This is trying to align our county spending with our infrastructure improvements. Right now, it's not explicitly happening, it's happening on a semi-level. We would like to see it explicitly happening. We want to see our county expenditures in line with implementing our land use map, at least in this area. Next up, TIF districts. We think that TIF districts, they only apply to industrial areas in the county. We can't do them on commercial or residential areas in the county. They're restricted just to industrial areas. We think TIF districts can be used to help finance infrastructure, for example, maybe a water system out of the Y, if the Y had a TIF district. Public-private partnerships. Lots of opportunities for public-private partnerships, working with the private sector to try to develop these infrastructure improvements. Perfect examples with the Bill grant, that was the public sector, or the private sector was going to donate the road right away for that. And that was to the tunes of millions of dollars. So that's a perfect example of a public-private partnership. But these water systems that exist, there might be others. Special improvement districts, pretty straightforward. You create a special improvement district to pay for an infrastructure improvement. You can build that infrastructure improvement with the special improvement district. You can use a special improvement district for the ongoing maintenance of that facility, or like roads or something like that. So that special improvement districts can go both towards building it and maintaining it in the long term. General obligation bonds, like the open space bond. County could, you'd have to go to the voters, but pass some sort of general obligation bond to pay for infrastructure. User fees, that can go to pay financing on some sort of infrastructure facility, as well as the ongoing maintenance. And impact fees, not something the county has right now, but maybe sometime in the future, in the next 20 years, we do. Impact fees can go towards building infrastructure that serves new growth, doesn't serve old growth, serves new growth. Very restricted. That would require a bunch of work to get through. So coordination is the last part of our implementation strategy. One opportunity is joint master planning with the city, and I talked about that out at the airport area. We think there's some momentum in that the city is interested in doing that, we're interested in doing that. We might have, the landowners are kind of like, we'll wait and see, but we think that could happen sooner than later, perhaps. Urban Growth Commission is a body that already exists. It's a sort of a joint body between the city and the county, and we would like to see that urban growth, the status of that Urban Growth Commission raised up a little bit and use it to have more public conversations about how the city and the county are coordinating these areas. You see the articles in the newspaper, the letters of the editor, where people are saying, the city and county don't even talk to each other. It's not true. We talk to each other all the time. We're always talking to each other about these projects. That might be an opportunity to talk about them publicly, so the public sees that we're actually talking about them. And the final coordination idea is a memorandum of understanding. The idea behind this is the city and the county sit down and talk about what values they have in common, what objectives they have in common in this area, what we're trying to achieve together in this area. I don't know exactly how it would look, but something like that where we talk about what we have in common. We put them in a non-binding MOU, a non-binding memorandum of understanding. But it provides the foundation for a lot of, of our joint planning that would occur over the next 20 years. And I think the real value in it is the exercise of actually getting together and talking about what we have in common. And it could be something that the Urban Growth Commission uses to look at proposals. So that's it. That's what we're going to be bringing forward to you in the next week. You should be getting it next week. So we're going to take these things down. We have them up on the board, but we want to be able to see and talk to you as we go through and answer your questions. We hope you have questions. We hope you guys try to stump us. Oh, yeah, that's good.
Okay, Andrew, Christine, thanks very much. Any comments or questions from board members on the information we heard? Jamie.
I apologize if I have asked this before. I don't remember if in previous presentations I have. I'm a retired architect who was heavily involved in the production of housing in this community for 35 years. So I know the market well. I know the housing market well. I particularly did a lot of work in affordable housing and higher density housing, multifamily housing. My concern is that we're on the path to adopting a land use plan and subsequently zoning. Has there any effort to calculate or determine whether, well, let me back up a second and say that most of Missoulians rent. And the economics of multifamily development are such that you need to build 35 to 40 units an acre in order to make it economically feasible. So my question is, since most of Missoula rents, and rentals requires that kind of density, is there going to be enough in this land use map and subsequent zoning to accommodate the anticipated growth over the next 10 or 20 years? Is there a determination or a calculation of that? And you can't, the county can't do it itself. It, of course, necessarily requires that the city participate in that calculation as well, too. So is that being done?
So, no, you haven't asked that question yet.
Okay.
Yeah. And the answer is yes, we're working on that. So we've done an analysis internally at our office in looking at the proposed land use map and the densities that are allowed within the proposed land use map. And a number of our residential type, a number of our districts that allow for residential, especially the multifamily, don't have a high end on, so we say 8 units per acre or greater. So we don't have a high end. We figure that bulk and dimensional requirements, parking, all that stuff will dictate the high end of the density that's allowed. So what we did was we looked at the land use map, we looked at the land use designations, we eliminated any constraints, the hard constraints that we can identify, things like 25% slope, floodplains, conservation easements, publicly owned lands would be a constraint. And then we looked at where our infrastructure is. And we said, if you're within 500 feet of a sewer, or within the city's water district, or within a quarter mile of a road, we identified those tracts that met that criteria. It would actually, it's not an or, it's an and, so you have to be within those parameters to be included. So we identified the parcels that would be considered development ready and then not development ready in the near term, and did a range, a low end to high end of units. And we did get in the development ready area somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000 units that, based off the infrastructure we have right now, could be developed. So between 4 to 10,000 units. So we need 6,000 for the next 20 years in the county. So we're within that range. So what that's telling me is, in the near term, we're okay, but over the long term, we need to work on some of these infrastructure improvements to get some of these additional areas online. So if you add in the not development-ready areas, assuming that they get infrastructure over the long term, we start to get up, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we start to get up in the 20 to 40,000 unit range. So once we have the infrastructure to some of these locations, we have enough growth in this land use map for decades and decades. So yeah, we are cognizant of the amount of growth we're going to see, and we are considering that. Right now, these numbers are we're still in the draft mode of figuring that out. The city is also working on updating their UFTA process that looks at the same thing, and so they're taking a somewhat similar but a little more sophisticated approach, I think, than we are.
Well, that's good to hear. The burden is those of us who work in land development is upzoning. That gets people upset. Increased urbanization in my street, my neighborhood, my part of the county. That's where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah, so we've talked about in the implementation strategy, I hit on it, we would like to try to identify areas that the county can proactively rezone, and that would be identifying areas where we can increase density through our zoning, the main purpose of that. But yeah, NIMBYism, that's reality. Yeah, it's something that we have to face. Yep.
Jason.
So I brought up tonight that, I may have some conflicts of interest just being in the business that I'm in. I represent people who own land. So as we get into the hearing, for sure, I'm not going to be commenting on the map and those pieces. Depending on the will of the board tonight, I had some notes about big picture stuff that I'd be willing to talk about, but if you guys want me to be quiet in fear of, swaying you towards one way or the other, or towards, like I said, I will not talk specifics. I just wanted to kind of make sure that disclosure was there, and that during the hearing I will not vote, and I'll just be a member of the public. So just so you guys know. But I do have some big picture stuff I'm willing to offer, and I can also just offer them later as a member of the public, so.
I, for one, would like to hear what you have to say. I think this board and the community needs to hear what you have to say. And I recognize the delicacy of your position. Because
today's not a public hearing, so if, some of these are big picture things that I would have commented on regardless of my other positions. They're just more, beneficial things. So I'm fine either way. Like I said, I'll submit my comments one way or another, but some of them are questions that'll also help. So,
we talked about this at the beginning of the meeting. It's my view that sharing big picture comments about the process and the information that we've heard without regard to any particular piece of property for which you represent the owners, that sort of thing, seems okay to me. I also want to, defer to the folks at the county who've put the effort into this and who may or may not feel comfortable with that. And I think you're sensitive to that as well, so.
Yeah, I just don't want any perceived issue that, we get accused of that enough as it is. I got plenty of that last night at the Hillview hearing. But we're professionals, and I can't do that. And so, that's just not what we do. And so I don't want there to be a perceived opinion that that's the direction we're going, so.
Yeah, Jason, it's ultimately your decision to recuse yourself or not. I think maybe you and I should talk. And we have time between now and the hearing, and one of the two of us talk, and then you can come back to the board with your decision at the hearing.
And I agree with that for anything else. The things that I've thought about just from hearing from the board, I think I can share today perfectly fine, and it has nothing to do with any of the properties I represent.
Okay.
But one of them would be is just communication. You talked about infrastructure and me being a civil engineer. I continually get on my soapbox about the decentralized sewer concept. I'm an on-site sewer kind of guy, and I feel like the road barriers and blocks that we get when everybody tries to throw a huge solution to a small problem. The county could seriously consider, if they're, thinking about innovation, creating standardized maintenance. The EPA on-site guidance manual, there's 5 levels, and the county, there's other counties in the state that have implemented portions of those, and it would be a huge step towards your infrastructure concept. And essentially, it's not, hey, we don't need a big system. It would be that private partnership, which is you build it to our standards, we'll take it, we'll own it, and we'll maintain it. And honestly, that long-term maintenance is the biggest issue with on-site wastewater, and they actually recognize it as a superior wastewater treatment to centralized and large sewer treatment because it's smaller. You can deal with it. Big is, it's millions of dollars to fix, and small is not. It is scalable, believe it or not, kind of thing. So that's one of the comments that I thought would be, for your infrastructure piece, would be very good.
Peter.
I have a kind of a bigger issue question. Let's see if I can figure out how to ask it. Do you anticipate the growth that we're going to have in the next 20 or 30 years, that you have a good handle of that, where it's going to happen? I mean, how much of our discussion is based on stuff we can anticipate versus a developer showing up and saying, I want to build in Lolo. I don't care that you guys have been planning all these other parts, but I have plans there, and you're caught flat-footed. How much do you think you have a good crystal ball here?
So I think our population projections are, the 14,000 number is fairly solid. We looked at, we used the population projection that's in the growth policy, and that's shared with the city of Missoula. We both are using the same population projection. It's created by a company named eRemi. They're demographers. This is what they do. They do population projections. They're complex formulas, how they created them. I have a lot of experience with this population projection. It's used, it was actually commissioned by the Montana Department of Commerce, and it's available for every county in the state of Montana. I've seen, it was developed in 2011, 2012. I've seen it underperform in some places, like Park County, for example. I wrote a growth policy in Park County before I worked here, where they projected in the next 20 years, Park County was going to grow by 150 people. And their economic calculations, I think, were misrepresenting the amenities and the population spillover from Bozeman. And obviously 150 people in 20 years is just way off. But I tried to stump it. Like, I tried to figure out that this was wrong for Missoula County, and I couldn't. We purchased another population projection. We looked at just the historic growth rates, and this really did seem to be the most relatively accurate that we've got.
Is that a good measure of what's going to happen? I mean, is that really, is that going to
it's the best thing we can do. That's what planners do for figuring out the amount of growth we're going to see. Okay. So using population projections. And I feel like we've got a pretty good one. And what we did was we kind of looked at past growth between the city and the county, and then I broke it down all by census block within this area. I went through a pretty long process and got to this 14,000 number. So there's a lot of factors that could change that. The city could just hit a home run on this inward focus concept, right? To just nail out of the park. And that would lower the amount of growth that we're going to see. They could totally swing and miss and just fail on the inward focus idea, and that would increase the amount of growth that we're going to see in this area. I think, there's some limitations, or, I think there is the potential. I think, 25% of the people that work in Missoula don't live in Missoula County or something like. There's some sort of stat like that. I don't think that's really going to affect the population projection. I think they probably took that into account when they created it. So I think it's probably pretty ballpark good. So the type of growth we're going to see, that's a different question, because this just says the amount, or, X number of people over 20 years. So I felt that was a shortcoming when we started this project. We have a number, the amount of growth, but what does that growth look like? How is it going to be? I mean, land use is really changing right now. The way planning as a profession is really growing. People's preferences for land use is changing. So we studied, we created what we called the planning area profile. Before we even started working on this land use map, we spent about 9 months on this project, working on what we call the planning area profile, where we did a ton of research on all the development trends that the really smart people out there, like Urban Land Institute and community builders, and we looked for the really smart people out there that are talking about what the future of our cities looks like, and what land use and real estate trends are occurring. And we identified a number of trends in commercial, industrial, and residential land use that we tried to really consider in this land use map. For example, retail is probably one of the things it's going through some of the biggest changes right now. 20 years ago, it was all about strip development, auto-orientated, big parking lot, building in the back, Reserve Street. That's called a power center in the real estate world. It's big, huge box stores, big, huge parking lots, big, high volume roadway. It's referred to as a power center. And power centers are nationally are wavering on their, they're starting to fade out. Retail is starting to shift more towards mixed use, amenity-rich, walkable. So what we did was we identified that trend in this document, and then we said we had a technical committee that had representatives from all parts of our community, all the different facets, from conservation to realtors, everything in between. And we said, here's the trend that's happening nationally. Is this happening here? So we're going from these power centers to what's called a lifestyle center. And with that example, it was yes, it is happening here. That we look at the old Sawmill District. That's a lifestyle center. That's the future mall. It's not the mall of Southgate Mall. That's the mall we used to do in the 70s. The future mall is Sawmill District, the old Sawmill District. It's the Fox Theater Triangle project that's maybe coming online in the city. It's these mixed-use, high-amenity developments. So yeah, those things are happening here. Now the next question we asked was, is that something that the county really needs to anticipate planning for? And the thing about those power centers or those lifestyle centers is they need to be in high population locations. They need to be in high traffic locations. Really, we're talking about urban core locations. So maybe not so much in the county, but maybe out by the airport. Maybe that is the potential. Maybe that does have the potential to have one. And so you see, we've identified that community mixed use area. And maybe this could have some lifestyle center or new urbanist type aspects to it in the future. So yeah, we really did try to get in. I mean, we're not going to catch every trend that's happening out there in the world of city building, but we really evaluated it and tried. This is a future land use map. We wanted to reflect the future of land use and not what happened 20 years ago and project that forward. So yeah, we put a lot of thought into it. Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Jason?
It actually is related to what Peter's asking about. I guess the first one's just a question. So will there be a subdivision regulation update when you talk about tying infrastructure to the growth policy map?
Maybe misheard you. Tiny infrastructure?
No, will there be a...
Tying, okay.
Tying? I don't know what I said there, but will there be a subdivision update to the regulations for the infrastructure piece? Because, the growth policy can't really be used in subdivision review.
Right. So the concept is that this wouldn't identify infrastructure standards. Like, that's not our intent with the mobility and access. But it's, so, like a road needs to be 24 feet wide, or, our sidewalks need to be 8 feet wide or something like that. That's not the intent. That needs to be identified in our regulations or standards. But what we're saying is some of these areas need urban type infrastructure, like roads with curb and gutter and sidewalks. And some of them, a dirt road is probably all you really need.
Yeah, because the current regs say, hey, if you've got small lots, you build this type of infrastructure. And I think what I heard you saying is, regardless if you build small or large lots, if you're building in this area, you're going to build this kind of infrastructure.
Right.
But to me, that still requires a subdivision regulation update.
Yes.
Because you have to have an expectation as you're going through that process. You can't get sprung on, oh, by the way, you're in this area based on the growth policy, therefore you got to do this kind of infrastructure.
That's correct.
Okay. That's my question.
Yes, update the regulations. And we want to have it specified in the regulation, in the subdivision regulations. If you're in urban residential or whatever the land use designation, or, planned neighborhood, or this is the infrastructure standard you follow. So we can do that, making that tie to the growth policy. But yeah, that it's supposed to be implemented through the subdivision regulations, not willy-nilly.
And then the other one still related to subdivision and growth that I think you're saying, well, you think you're going to have everybody go to the Y or, wherever it is, and then they want to be over here and they've got a really great plan. I really hope the leadership, and I don't know how else you end up getting it, but is to say, we're flexible. I think in the past, people have said, well, this is our growth policy and this is what we wrote, and now we're going to make it really hard for you to go where we didn't want you to go. I'm hopeful that that's not the case here. If somebody comes up with a really great plan to put something in someplace where you're not expecting it and it works, that it shouldn't be like, oh, our growth policy didn't say that. I hope that the flexibility, I guess, is something I would hope is included in, the documentation. Like, we may not know it all, and there may be other opportunities. Somebody may land that you would have never expected to develop may come on the opportunity. And I think, so that's the other thing to make it very clear is, everything to date, I'll say 95%, is when it comes to creating housing stock, and I think people forget this, is a private-public partnership every single time, all day long. Because barely any public entity ever creates housing stock that, there's a rare occasion. That's why I say 95%. It takes a person who takes risk and invests their own money to get to that point. And I think we have to acknowledge that and create that atmosphere that is like, yeah, we're working together because we also bring you something. We bring you a county maintained road. We bring you, this piece and this. And so we have to acknowledge both sides of it. But there's a tremendous amount of risk that comes from the private side too. And so that's the piece that I don't develop myself, even though, but I see it all the time, and it's like, holy cow, people don't really realize what's going on here and what's at stake, and the kind of the risk that people took leading into the 08, 07, 09 era. People lost a lot, and we're seeing developments today that are finally getting going because of the people who lost in the 08 area, because it went to the bank and now it went to, short sale, and now they're developing it because it went down in price because somebody lost money. And so somebody, out there on the private side lost money along the way. That's a huge risk. And so point being, to wrap it all back together, is somebody puts their butt out there on the line on the private side and shows a really good plan. I'm hoping we don't say, oh, the growth policy says we shouldn't be here. Yeah. I think you guys have done a great job with, for the most part. And so I don't think that's going to happen a lot. But it could. Yeah. I just, flexibility is something I just think would be a good thing to remember, is that there's, right now, there's a study done in Bonner for the sewer, and it, didn't go very far because I think they tried to go centralized really hard. Yeah. And somebody may come through and come up with bring in a private sewer entity that says, I'll build you a private sewer, but I want, I need to operate it for the next 20 years so I can recoup my expense. Well, that's an awesome opportunity and something we didn't expect. It could happen. Yep.
Yeah, so I think we hear you. And flexibility was something we really thought about. That's why we went from 34 land use designations, 64 or whatever total, down to 15. Mm-hmm. Each land use designation was intended to allow for a range of opportunities and not just one opportunity. We think that was a constraint of our current land use map, is if Because you're not designated residential 5 dwelling units per acre, you can't do anything else but 1 dwelling unit, 5 units per acre or whatever. So the land use designations allow flexibility within themselves, and I think the implementation strategy is purposely, has some specificity. I always struggle with that word, but it also remains general. So look, for example, wastewater treatment in Bonner, I remember that, I was there for that conversation too, and they did not like the centralized treatment option much. So we don't say we want that type of a treatment option. We leave that up to future decision making. Our land use designations all are sort of 40,000 foot level. They don't, they fit on one page. They're not huge paragraphs and descriptions. So, and then amending the land use map is something that I think should occur, and it should occur through 2 ways. The county, I think, needs to be more on top of its 5-year updates and its growth policy, and looking at the land use map on a more reoccurring basis. It can be challenging because it can be labor intensive, and we've got other priorities we've got to deal with, but those are things we should monitor. Is the land use map working? Is population projections changing? Like, are we off on the population projection? It's possible that we start growing much faster than we think. And then finally, private sector should be able to come in, and if it meets the goals, if it meets the goals of the community, they should be able to ask for amendments in the land use map. We include that in our implementation strategy. It's the same process that's identified in the growth policy, but we want to recognize that, yeah, maybe this land use map doesn't hit a home run and it needs to be changed in the future, and maybe someone's got a project that would work.
And I was surprised no other planning board said that. I think our entire planning board is in support of a bigger picture of zoning. What I'm not in support of is looking at areas that have current uses or current zonings and downzoning them just because of the growth policy. I'm in support of the upzoning to meet our need. I think that the need for housing and commercial and industrial, for our growth and our vibrancy of the community is more important. I feel like the other elements are already here in spades, and we can always do better, but if we're looking at our priorities, especially for the next 5 to 10 years, it needs to be on creating more opportunities. I think we're restricted right now, and so I really support the idea of looking at bigger picture and looking at some ideas to do that, and I think our entire planning board would. We actually have written memos to the city to say, why are we seeing one lot at a time coming in for rezonings? Why aren't we seeing blocks at a time coming in? So I just wanted to go on the record of saying that I'm sure we all support that. So
I want to agree with Jason wholeheartedly on that. And he said maybe the county doesn't need to be involved in the small malls or whatever. And I'm bigger picture, this really makes it clear to me that, the county and the city need to be involved together on everything that happens, and the creating more opportunities. So yet we get into that mindset where we're worried about view sheds and that sort of thing, and we got to start dealing with the infrastructure, with human infrastructure. We saw people from Target Range not wanting development on Reserve Street because that was some kind of buffer between the greater Missoula and Target Range, and so that's an interesting viewpoint, but it's, the whole thing needs to be involved, and all opportunities need to be looked at. And, maybe we do, and be more flexible. It's zoned 1 house per acre, but if you want farms or you want that stuff intertwined, then maybe we got to start looking at putting more houses in some of those places. And anyway, I agree, more opportunity, and city and county should be together on this whole deal, no matter what is coming up, whether it's a small mall or whatever it is.
Other comments or questions? I'm kind of reserving mine for the public hearing, just FYI. I have opinions and everything, but I'll
Is that a
express them.
threat or?
Not that anybody's actually wondering, but I don't know. Anyway, Peter.
Last question. I hope it's simple. And this is apropos Dudley's comments about South Reserve, are all the players who need to be involved in this on board? Transportation, sewer, water, schools, police, fire department. I mean, if you take off in one particular area, is transportation going to say, you didn't ask me permission? No, we're not going to support this. How do you do the coordination?
Took a year and a half to get to this point. We have, I can't count the number of stakeholder meetings we've had with every one of those types of entities. So they've all seen it, they've all commented on it, they've all put their input into it. You know, there are challenges. I mean, when I sit with Aaron Wilson, the transportation planner for the Metropolitan Planning Organization, yeah, we've got a congestion problem coming. He doesn't, sugarcoat it. You think Reserve Street's bad. I mean, go look at what Seattle is. There are, yeah, I mean, we talk about those things. There's maybe not, silver bullets to every issue. Some of it requires infrastructure. We've neglected our infrastructure in some ways over time. We need to start being more proactive in that, help address some of those issues, accommodate that additional growth. But yeah, we've been extremely thorough in who we've talked to with this, and I think it came out pretty well.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't aiming my question so much toward that. Yeah. It was more like, we don't anticipate those kind of problems, or we do anticipate those kind of problems?
Yeah,
that's more.
I think there are going to be problems with the growth we face. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have challenges that we have to overcome, and I think we do try to be pretty upfront about that, pointing out that we need to work on infrastructure, but there will be unforeseen things too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's why we should be looking at this map on a regular basis every 5 years and reevaluating.
Other comments or questions? Okay. I think that'll do it for the night.
Great questions. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate your time, and see you in approximately a month or more.
Yep, January 15th is.
January 15th.
I think we're going to hold that date, yeah.
Yeah, I guess the schedule would be kind of an interesting, how many opportunities are there for, comments on the specifics moving forward? I guess that's getting closer to more where you and I need to sit down, but.
Great question. We kind of forgot to talk about what's next with that. So we're going to try to get everything released next week, and we'll send it out through our normal channels, our email blasts. We'll put it on our websites. Talk to our communications department here at the county about whether they think we should do press releases and things like that to get the information out. Of course, we'll do a legal ad to meet the legal requirements of the hearing. So that will be, we'll definitely have one hearing with the planning board. We'll see how that goes, see how people comment. And then there will definitely also be a hearing with the county commissioners. At each step, we'll make amendments to the map. We've had a ton of comment so far to this point as well. There's been a lot of public input. We kind of see it, the energy starting to dive a little bit. So it's time to get moving on, towards the final endpoint.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Much appreciated.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have any committee reports?
I actually will tell you something.
All right.
I didn't make today's meeting, but I did. There were 2 meetings in between last time we met, and I was the Transportation Policy Board. But one thing I thought, that's the one meeting I attended, they had some really great statistics on accidents, reported accidents and accidents that were responded to and where they're happening in Missoula. And, there's a couple things I wish they had, which they didn't, where they counted traffic at intersections, whether they were roundabouts or standard intersections. And I looked at some of it, and it was as I suppose. There might be less accidents per amount of vehicles at the roundabouts. But anyway, it's good stuff. I just brought this so you can pass it around, but it's on the Missoula in Motion website, and it's pretty interesting where these accidents are happening and who's involved and all that. And I was good stats. I was impressed they collected it, and hopefully it helps figure out our transportation systems. So there you go. That's my report.
Thanks, Dudley. Any questions for Dudley about that? Maybe we could pass that around at the end of the meeting or something. Any old business? I don't think we have any old business. New business and referrals. We have the matter of the reappointment of Jamie Hoffman as the planning board appointed member, the most contentious item of the evening.
So moved.
So it's my understanding, Christine, that the Conservation District is not interested in exercising their right of appointment, which then defaults to the planning board. Mr. Hoffman, you are interested in serving again? Any additional information besides that, you think, Christine, that we need to know about?
I think that's it. Are you still interested in serving on the Urban Growth Commission as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't be too excited about it.
We're for the meeting this year.
Okay.
So I'll volunteer for that too.
Okay. Well, then I guess we will take a vote on the reappointment of Mr. Hoffman. All those in favor of reappointing Jamie as the planning board appointed member to the Missoula Consolidated Planning Board, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, seeing none. Jamie, you're back in it, sir. Thank you. The other item of new business, which is on the agenda, I was contacted by Denise Alexander with the request from John DeBari for somebody from the board to go to an LUP meeting in January, Land Use and Planning Committee of the city. I mean, it doesn't have to be a city member, but I guess that kind of makes sense for it to be a city member. I'm happy to do it. I was kind of hoping Helen would be here because I'm sure she's also happy to do it, but maybe I'll just say that I'll go ahead and schedule a meeting in January to go update that committee, if that all sounds good to you guys.
I think with you being the chair, I think it's actually the most appropriate as well.
Yeah.
Even
I
if
guess
you were
we'll
sitting-
see what happens in the new year here, but.
We talked about that a few months ago, but that'd be great if you.
Okay, yep, I will be happy to do that. And, yeah, I guess as far as another thing to just consider is whether folks, how we want to work president and vice president heading into the next year. And, I don't know, we just kind of have that in the back of your mind for the first meeting in January, and we can discuss things then, so. Comments from planning board members?
I was reminded of an old quote for some reason listening today is who causes the impacts? The first person who moved here or the last person who moved here? It's the first person.
Okay.
Who caused the road to be built in the first place? Something to think about as a planning board member is, when we talked about NIMBYism and things like that, I just like to remind people of that sometimes.
That's a good point. Oh, man, that's a existential puzzle.
Rack your brain for a nice Tuesday
Not
night.
be able to sleep till our next meeting. Any other comments from planning board members that don't require so much brain power to process?
I would like to comment, like Jason he's holding back comments, but, as far as I'm concerned, I'm one of the lay people on the board, and it's good to hear from Jamie, John, people with expertise, whether it's architecture or planning or civil engineering or legal aspect, and so I always want to hear everything that everybody's got to say, and I realize there may be a conflict of interest, and I'm sure we'll hear from you one way or the other, but that's important. That's why you're here, is you have that expertise, and so that's what I think.
I agree.
All right. Anything else? Okay, seeing no further comments, we will adjourn. Thanks much.